A little girl with cancer had one wish: to meet a royal guard. After 15 years of unwavering service, no one expected him to break protocol. But when he did, what followed left the entire crowd in tears. Here's what happened. But before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow at the same time, we'll bring you another story of courage and discipline from the royal guards that you won't want to miss. Now picture this: Buckingham Palace on an ordinary morning. Tourists everywhere, cameras clicking, children pointing at the guards in their bright red uniforms. But this wasn't going to be an ordinary day. Because among that crowd was a 7-year-old girl named Emily, and her story was about to change everything. Before we get into what happened, you need to understand something important. The royal guards aren't just men in fancy uniforms standing around for photos. These are real soldiers, combat-trained warriors. Many of them have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones around the world. They've seen things most of us can't imagine. And when they stand guard at the royal palaces, they follow rules that date back over 360 years. Let me tell you about these rules because they're not what you think. First, these guards must stand completely still for 10 minutes at a time. No scratching, no adjusting, no fidgeting. They do this for 2-hour shifts in all weather: freezing rain, burning sun, snow, wind. It doesn't matter. They stand there like statues. Second, they cannot smile, they cannot laugh, they cannot show any emotion whatsoever. Some people think they get fined for smiling, but that's not exactly true. However, breaking composure is heavily frowned upon and can damage their military career. Third, they cannot talk to tourists. No matter what you say to them, no matter how funny or clever you think you are, they won't respond. They're not being rude, they're doing their job, protecting the royal family and maintaining centuries of tradition. Fourth, they wear those famous bearskin hats. Those tall, fuzzy black hats aren't just for show. They're made from real bearskin. They're 18 inches tall and they can weigh up to 9 pounds. Try balancing that on your head while standing perfectly still for 2 hours. Fifth, if they need to move during their post, they do it in a very specific way. They march exactly 10 paces forward, stamp their feet, then march back. Everything is precise. Everything is measured. Everything follows protocol. And here's something that might surprise you. If a guard faints from heat or exhaustion, they're trained to fall forward while maintaining their position at attention. Even in unconsciousness, they're supposed to maintain discipline. That's the level of commitment we're talking about. Now, the guards can defend themselves and the palace. If you get too close, they'll shout a warning that'll make your ears ring. They're armed with loaded rifles and they have full authority to use them if needed. But under normal circumstances, they don't interact with the public at all. These aren't tour guides or entertainers. They're active duty soldiers performing a real military function. The Royal Guard consists of 5 regiments: the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, and the Welsh Guards. Each one has a proud history stretching back centuries. You can tell them apart by small details in their uniforms: the spacing of buttons, the placement of plumes on their bearskin caps. But all of them share the same unwavering commitment to duty. So when I tell you that breaking protocol is rare, I mean it's almost unheard of. These men have stood through tourist pranks, through people yelling in their faces, through children crying, through proposals, through everything imaginable. And they don't move. They don't react, because that's what being a royal guard means. But there have been a few moments, very few, when guards have shown their humanity. There was a blind boy who saluted a guard once. The guard couldn't speak or move his arms, but he stamped his foot twice to acknowledge the salute. That tiny gesture went viral. Another time, a guard stepped slightly closer to a boy with Down syndrome so his mother could get a better photo. Just a small step, but it meant everything to that family. During an extreme heat wave, tourists saw a guard accept water from a fellow soldier. It was a practical necessity, but people were shocked to see even that small break in the rigid stance. These moments are so rare that when they happen, millions of people watch the videos. Because we're fascinated by this tension between duty and humanity. We want to know, what does it take for these iron-disciplined soldiers to break their protocol? And that brings us back to Emily. Emily was 7 years old. She had stage 4 cancer. Her little body was fighting a battle that most adults couldn't handle. She'd been through rounds of chemotherapy that left her weak and exhausted. Her hair had fallen out, so she wore a colorful pink beanie that her grandmother had knitted for her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her parents had to support her when she walked because her legs got tired so easily. But here's the thing about Emily. Despite everything she was going through, despite the pain and the fear and the treatments that made her sick, she had this bright spark in her eyes, this determination. She'd read every book about the Royal Guards she could find. She'd watched every video on YouTube. She knew about the different regiments, about their history, about their medals and their duties. She was fascinated by their courage, their discipline, their dedication. To Emily, the Royal Guards represented everything brave and strong. And she had one wish. Just one. She wanted to meet a Royal Guard in person. That's all she wanted. Not a trip to Disneyland, not a shopping spree, not a celebrity meetup. She wanted to stand in front of Buckingham Palace and see a real Royal Guard up close. When her parents asked her why, she said something that broke their hearts. She said, "Because they stand strong even when it's hard. Just like I have to." The doctors had told Emily's parents that time was running out. They used gentle words like limited and making memories and comfort care. But what they meant was clear. Emily might not have much time left. So her parents planned the trip to London. They saved up money. They booked flights and a hotel. They made sure Emily had enough energy for the journey. And on a bright morning in late spring, they brought their daughter to Buckingham Palace to fulfill her wish. Emily wore her favorite pink dress for the occasion, the one with little flowers on it. She'd picked it out herself. She wore her pink beanie, white tights, and shoes she could barely feel on her numb feet. But she insisted on walking on her own as much as possible. "I want to stand soldier straight," she told her parents. They arrived at the palace just as the morning shift was beginning. Tourists were already gathering, jockeying for position, holding up cameras and phones. Emily's father lifted her up so she could see over the crowd. And that's when she saw him. Guard James Harrison. He stood at his post near the palace entrance, his scarlet-red tunic bright against the gray stone, his bearskin cap adding nearly 2 feet to his already impressive height. His rifle was positioned perfectly. His white gloves were spotless. His boots gleamed in the sunlight. To Emily, he looked like a real-life toy soldier come to life. "Daddy, look," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "He's so tall, and his uniform is so red." Her parents exchanged a look. That look that parents of sick children know too well. A look of love and heartbreak mixed together. Because moments like this, moments of pure joy for their daughter, were becoming more and more precious. James Harrison had been a Royal Guard for 15 years. Before that, he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd seen combat. He'd lost friends. He'd carried wounded soldiers through firefights. He'd been trained to control his emotions, to focus on the mission, to never let his guard down. And for 15 years at his post, he'd maintained perfect discipline. He'd stood through rain and sun. He'd ignored thousands of tourists trying to make him smile. He'd stayed focused when people waved hands in his face, when they shouted, when they tried everything to get a reaction. He'd never broken protocol, not once. But on this particular morning, as he stood at attention with his eyes fixed forward, something caught his attention. It was a small family making their way through the crowd, a mother and father moving carefully, protectively, and between them, a little girl in a pink dress and a pink beanie. Harrison's training had taught him to be aware of everything in his surroundings without appearing to look. He could see the way the little girl's parents supported her. He could see how slowly she moved, how much effort each step took. He could see the beanie covering what was clearly a bald head underneath. And he could see something else. The absolute joy on her face as she looked at him. Emily's mother was explaining quietly to her daughter, "Remember, sweetheart, the guards have very important jobs. We can take a picture, but we can't disturb them." Emily nodded seriously. "I know, Mommy. They protect the Queen and the palace and hundreds of years of tradition." She pronounced the last word carefully, like she'd practiced it. Other tourists had started to notice the family too. A young mother nearby bent down to her own daughter and explained softly, "That little girl is very sick. That's why we should be extra kind." An elderly couple approached Emily's parents. Our grandson went through the same thing, the woman said gently, tears in her eyes. The strength these children show, it's remarkable. Emily's father's voice was barely a whisper. The doctors said we should make this trip soon, while she still has the strength. This is her biggest wish. Around them, the crowd had grown quieter. Parents pulled their children close. Some explained in hushed tones about being kind to others. Some just watched with sympathy in their eyes. Emily moved closer to Harrison's post, her steps small but determined. Her mother helped her stand as straight as possible. "Can we take a picture, Daddy?" Emily asked. "I promise I'll be really good. I won't get too close or break any rules." Her father raised his camera, his hands shaking slightly. Emily positioned herself at what she thought was a respectful distance. She tried to stand as tall as she could, tried to mimic the guard's perfect posture even though her legs were trembling with effort. "Do I look soldier straight?" she asked her parents, her voice carrying across the now quiet courtyard. Through his peripheral vision, Harrison could see her reflection in the palace windows. Could see her trying so hard to stand tall despite her obvious weakness. Could see the medal pin on her jacket, probably from her hospital, some token for brave patience. Could see her parents trying not to cry as they captured this moment their daughter had dreamed about. In his 15 years of service, Harrison had stood through everything. But something about this little girl, this brave child fighting her own battle, touched something deep inside him. Something that all his military training hadn't quite managed to seal away. He thought about the soldiers he'd served with in Afghanistan, the ones who'd shown courage in the face of impossible odds, the ones who'd kept fighting even when they were scared, the ones who'd earned their medals through sheer determination and heart. And he realized that the little girl in the pink dress, standing just a few feet away, was showing that exact same kind of courage. She was fighting a battle just as real, just as difficult, as any combat zone. Maybe more so. Because she was 7 years old, and she was facing it with a smile. In that moment, James Harrison made a decision. He'd followed protocol for 15 years. He'd maintained discipline through everything. But sometimes, he realized, there's a higher duty than protocol. Sometimes the greatest act of service isn't standing still. It's recognizing true courage when you see it. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Harrison did something no one expected. He moved. It wasn't a careless movement. It was precise, deliberate, controlled. Every bit the measured motion of a trained soldier. His boots pivoted with military precision as he turned to face Emily directly. A collective gasp rippled through the tourists. Phones raised. People stepped back. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. Emily's eyes went wide with surprise. Her hand instinctively reached for her father's, but she didn't step back. She stood her ground, this brave little warrior, even though she was clearly shocked. Harrison didn't stop there. With the same precision he'd learned in 15 years of military service, he lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself down to Emily's eye level. He looked at her directly, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but carried the kind of authority that comes from years of command. "Hello, Emily," he said. Emily's mouth opened in amazement. You can talk," she whispered. Then, remembering her manners, she quickly added, "Sir." A small smile crossed Harrison's face. Around them, tourists had their phones out, recording, but many were crying too hard to keep the cameras steady. "I couldn't help but notice," Harrison continued, "how perfectly you've been standing at attention. That takes real discipline." Emily's face lit up with pride. "I've been practicing, sir. I wanted to do it right." Harrison's white-gloved hand moved to his chest. He carefully unpinned one of his medals. Not just any medal, one he'd earned during his service in Afghanistan. A medal for bravery under fire. He held it out to Emily. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard, "is for exceptional bravery in the face of difficult conditions. Something you know quite a bit about, I believe." Emily stared at the medal, then up at Harrison, then back at the medal. Tears filled her eyes. But don't you need it?" she asked, showing concern for him even in this moment. Don't you need it for your uniform? Harrison's expression softened. I think you've earned it more than I have. You fight your battle every single day with courage and grace. That deserves recognition. Emily's mother had both hands over her mouth, sobbing. Her father's camera was shaking as he continued to record, tears streaming down his face. May I? Harrison asked, waiting for Emily's nod before carefully pinning the medal to her pink dress. There. Now you're officially part of the Guard. Emily touched the medal with trembling fingers, her face showing pure wonder. She looked up at Harrison with those bright eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. Thank you, she whispered. This is the best day of my whole life. Would you like to learn the official salute? Harrison asked. Emily nodded eagerly. For the next few moments, the entire crowd watched as this combat veteran, this man trained to show no emotion, gently guided this sick little girl's hand through the proper military salute. He corrected her form with patience. He encouraged her when her arm got tired. He treated her not like a sick child, but like a fellow soldier learning an important skill. Excellent form, he said when she finally got it perfect. You're a natural. Then he did something that made even the toughest tourists break down crying. He opened his arms. Would you do me the honor? He asked. Emily didn't hesitate. She stepped forward into his embrace, her small arms wrapping around his broad shoulders. This man, trained to remain unmoved by anything, held this brave little girl gently, carefully, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they finally separated, Harrison stood to his full height. And then he did something that left everyone absolutely speechless. He brought his hand up in a formal military salute. Not the casual kind some guards give for tourist photos. The real thing. The kind reserved for fellow soldiers, for veterans, for dignitaries of the highest rank. He was saluting Emily, treating her not as a sick child or a tourist, but as a fellow warrior. Someone who'd earned his respect through courage under fire. Emily, standing there in her pink dress with her new medal pinned to her chest, straightened up as tall as her weak legs would allow, and she returned the salute, just as he'd taught her. Perfect form. The crowd erupted in applause. People were crying openly now. Strangers were hugging. Parents were holding their children tight. An elderly man in the back whispered to his wife, In 60 years of coming to this palace, I've never seen anything like that. Emily's mother managed to speak through her tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to us. Her father added, his voice breaking. This is more than we ever dreamed. Thank you, sir. Harrison gave them a small nod, the kind soldiers give when words aren't enough. Then he looked back at Emily one more time. Remember, he said with quiet authority, you're one of us now. Stand tall. Yes, sir, Emily replied, her hand rising in one final perfect salute. With the same precision that had marked every movement, Harrison turned back to his post. His boots clicked together. His rifle settled into position, his eyes fixed forward with ceremonial sharpness. But something was different now. Every person in that courtyard could feel it. The Guard stood not just as a symbol of tradition and duty, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies in recognizing when to break protocol for the sake of humanity. As Emily and her parents made their way back through the crowd, people parted respectfully. Many reached out to touch her shoulder or offer quiet words of encouragement. The medal gleamed on her pink dress, catching the sunlight, a permanent reminder that courage comes in many forms. A young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mom, why did the Guard give her his medal? His mother knelt beside him, wiping tears from her eyes. Because, sweetheart, she's fighting a battle just as important as any war, and real heroes recognize other heroes no matter how big or small. An American tourist who'd been recording the whole thing was showing the video to his wife. This is going to go viral, he said softly. People need to see this. They need to remember that behind those uniforms are real people with real hearts. He was right. Within hours, videos of Harrison's gesture had spread across social media. Millions of people watched as this stoic Guard broke protocol to honor a brave little girl. The comment section filled with tears and praise. But the story didn't end there. What most people don't know is what happened afterward. Emily's parents received permission to send a thank you letter to the palace. In it, they explained that Emily had worn that medal every single day after their visit. She wore it to her treatments. She wore it to doctor's appointments. She wore it when she was too tired to get out of bed. She touched it whenever she needed courage. The medal that Harrison had earned for bravery in combat became Emily's source of strength in her own battle, and Emily carried it with the same honor that Harrison had. 3 months after that day at Buckingham Palace, Emily passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family. She was still wearing the medal. At her funeral, her parents placed the medal in her small hands. But they also sent a letter to guard James Harrison, telling him about the difference his gesture had made in their daughter's final months. They told him that his kindness had given Emily something precious, the feeling that her struggle mattered, that her courage was real, that she was a warrior, recognized by another warrior. Harrison attended the funeral in his dress uniform. He stood at attention as they lowered Emily's small casket, tears streaming down his face. Afterward, he spoke briefly with her parents. "She was braver than most soldiers I've served with," he said quietly. "It was an honor to know her, even for such a short time." Emily's father shook his hand. "You gave our daughter something no doctor could. You gave her recognition. You saw her as strong, not sick. That meant everything." Today, if you visit Buckingham Palace and you're lucky enough to be there when James Harrison is on duty, you might notice something different about him. On the inside of his uniform, hidden from view, he wears a small pink ribbon, a reminder of a brave little girl who taught him that sometimes the greatest act of service isn't following rules. It's knowing when humanity matters more. The story of Emily and Guard Harrison reminds us of something important. We often think of strength as being unmovable, unchanging, rigid. We admire people who never break, who never bend, who stand firm no matter what. And there's value in that kind of discipline, certainly. The Royal Guards represent centuries of tradition and unwavering duty. But true strength isn't just about standing still. It's about knowing when to move. It's about recognizing that rules serve a purpose, but compassion serves a higher calling. It's about understanding that the real enemy isn't protocol being broken. It's allowing tradition to make us forget our humanity. Harrison's 15 years of perfect service weren't diminished by that one moment of compassion. If anything, they were defined by it, because anyone can follow rules. It takes real courage to know when to break them for the right reasons. Emily's story also teaches us about how we measure bravery. We give medals for soldiers who charge into battle. We honor people who perform heroic rescues. We celebrate athletes who push through pain to win competitions. And we should. Those things take real courage. But what about the 7-year-old girl who faces chemotherapy with a smile? What about the child who stands tall despite a body that's failing? What about the kid who finds joy in simple moments even though they're scared and hurting? Isn't that bravery too? Maybe even more so. Emily didn't choose her battle. She didn't volunteer for it. She didn't get to train for it. But she fought it with everything she had. And in doing so, she showed the kind of courage that can't be taught in any military academy. Harrison recognized that. In that moment, soldier saw soldier, warrior saw warrior, and rank, age, and circumstances didn't matter. All that mattered was respect between two people who understood what it meant to stand firm when everything inside you wants to fall. The crowd that day witnessed something rare. Not just a guard breaking protocol, but a moment of pure human connection. A moment where tradition bowed to compassion, where duty expanded to include kindness, where strength showed itself through gentleness. Many of those tourists said afterward that it changed them. Parents went home and hugged their children tighter. People donated to children's cancer charities. Some reassessed their own lives, asking themselves if they were living with the same courage Emily showed. One woman wrote on social media, "I've been complaining about my problems all week. Then I watched a 7-year-old girl with cancer stand at attention and salute with perfect form. I'm ashamed of myself and inspired at the same time." That's the power of stories like Emily's. They put our own struggles in perspective. They remind us what real courage looks like. They show us that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the smallest people carry the heaviest burdens with the most grace. For Guard James Harrison, that day marked a turning point. He'd always taken his duties seriously. He'd always been professional, disciplined, exact. But after meeting Emily, he understood his role differently. Yes, he protected the palace. Yes, he maintained tradition. Yes, he stood watch over the royal family. But more than that, he represented something symbolic to people around the world. He represented strength, honor, courage, dedication. And sometimes the best way to represent those values isn't through perfect stillness. It's through perfect humanity. Other guards heard about what Harrison did. Some older veterans nodded in approval, understanding immediately why he'd done it. Some younger guards asked questions, wanting to know how he'd made that decision in the moment. And the officers? Well, officially, breaking protocol is always wrong. But unofficially, quietly, in conversations that were never recorded, more than one superior officer told Harrison that he'd done the right thing, that he'd honored not just Emily, but the very values the guard was meant to represent. Because here's something most people don't understand about military discipline. It's not about blindly following rules. It's about training yourself so thoroughly that you can make the right decision under pressure. It's about developing judgment so sound that you know when the rulebook applies and when something more important is at stake. Harrison's 15 years of service hadn't just taught him how to stand still. They'd taught him how to recognize what matters. And in that moment, what mattered was a brave little girl who needed to know her fight was seen, acknowledged, and honored. The videos of that day have been watched millions of times. They've been shared across every social media platform. They've been featured on news programs. They've made people cry in countries around the world. But more importantly, they've started conversations about how we treat sick children, about what we value in society, about when rules should be followed and when they should be broken, about the true meaning of courage. Emily's parents have become advocates for childhood cancer research. They speak at fundraisers and share Emily's story. They always mention that day at Buckingham Palace and how much it meant to their daughter. They show the video, and there's never a dry eye in the room. Emily fought for 3 years, her mother says at these events. 3 years of treatments and surgeries and pain. But the last 3 months of her life after meeting Guard Harrison were different. She had proof that her courage was real. She had been recognized by a real soldier, given a real medal, treated with real respect. That sustained her through so much. The medal itself, Harrison's combat medal, is now displayed at a children's hospital in Emily's hometown. It sits in a special case with her photo and her story. Young cancer patients who come to the hospital can see it, can read about the brave girl who earned a soldier's respect, can touch the case and draw strength from knowing that their battles matter too. A plaque beneath the medal reads, "In honor of Emily, a warrior who stood tall," presented by Guard James Harrison, who understood that courage has many uniforms. Below that, in smaller letters, "Sometimes the greatest act of duty comes from listening to your heart." That phrase, listening to your heart, sounds simple, but it's profound when you think about it, because your heart will tell you things your training might not. Your heart will recognize moments that the rule book doesn't cover. Your heart will guide you toward compassion when procedure says to stay unmoved. Harrison listened to his heart that day. And in doing so, he didn't betray his duty. He fulfilled it in its highest form. He protected something more valuable than a palace. He protected the spirit of a child who needed to feel strong. He guarded something more precious than tradition. He guarded the belief that courage deserves recognition, no matter what form it takes. So what would you have done in Guard Harrison's position? Would you have stayed at attention, following protocol as trained? Or would you have broken ranks to honor a brave little girl? There's no wrong answer, really. Duty and discipline matter. The Royal Guards maintain important traditions. But so does compassion. So does recognizing when a moment calls for humanity over procedure. Maybe the real lesson is this: the strongest people aren't the ones who never bend. They're the ones who know when bending is the strongest thing they can do. The bravest soldiers aren't the ones who follow every order without question. They're the ones who understand the spirit behind the orders and act accordingly. And the greatest traditions aren't the ones that never change. They're the ones that prove their worth by adapting when something more important is at stake. Emily's story and Harrison's response to it will be remembered long after both of them are gone. It'll be told to new royal guards as they learn what it really means to serve. It'll be shared by parents teaching their children about courage. It'll be remembered by anyone who's ever wondered if their personal battle matters. Because it does matter. Every struggle, every fight, every moment of standing tall when you want to fall. Whether you're a soldier in a combat zone or a child in a hospital bed, your courage is real. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, someone will see it and acknowledge it in a way that changes everything. That's what Guard James Harrison did for Emily. He saw her, he recognized her, he honored her. And in that one moment of broken protocol, he fulfilled his duty more completely than in 15 years of perfect stillness. He protected something worth protecting. He guarded something worth guarding. He served something worth serving. The human spirit. The courage of a child. The belief that kindness matters more than tradition. That's the story of a royal guard who broke protocol for a little girl with cancer. A story of two warriors meeting on a palace courtyard. A story of duty expanding to include compassion. A story that reminds us all that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply see someone else's courage and honor it. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs a reminder about what real courage looks like. And subscribe to our channel for more stories about the Royal Guards and the extraordinary moments that happen when duty meets humanity. Hit that bell icon so you never miss our future uploads. Tomorrow, at this same time, we'll bring you another story of discipline and compassion from the Royal Guards that you won't want to miss. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and share your thoughts. When is it right to break tradition for the sake of compassion? Have you ever witnessed a moment that restored your faith in humanity? We'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, remember what Emily and Guard Harrison taught us. Stand tall, be brave, and never forget that sometimes the greatest acts of duty come from listening to your heart.